My wedding day began with lilies and dreams of forever. But by the time the cake was cut, I knew I was trapped in a nightmare with a stranger. The scent of lilies and buttercream was supposed to be the smell of my forever. For months, it was all I could think about. I'd obsessed over every detail of this day, from the exact shade of ivory for my dress to the tiny, handcrafted sugar flowers on our 6-tier cake. I wanted perfection, not because I'm a perfectionist, but because Mark deserved it. Our love story deserved it. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind you see in movies, the handsome, charismatic architect who sweeps the quiet librarian off her feet. He was my opposite in every way. Loud where I was quiet, spontaneous where I was a planner. He called it balancing each other out. My best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, called it a little concerning. I dismissed her worries, of course. Mark's brand of humor was boisterous. He loved pranks, loved being the center of attention, the life of the party. I'd seen him convince a friend that his car was towed, and then reveal it was just parked around the corner, laughing until tears streamed down his face while the poor guy was having a panic attack. I'd seen him switch the sugar with salt at his parents' house, much to the displeasure of his mother, Eleanor, who shot me a look as if I were the one who had put the salt shaker in his hand. "He just has so much energy," she'd say, with a thin, tight smile. "It's a boy thing. You'll get used to it." I tried. I really did. I told myself that his wild streak was part of his charm, the thing that pulled me out of my shell. Our wedding ceremony was flawless. Under a massive oak tree dripping with fairy lights, Mark had looked at me with tears in his eyes and recited vows that made my heart feel like it was going to beat right out of my chest. He spoke of my kindness, my gentle spirit, and how I was the calm to his storm. In that moment, every doubt I ever had, every whisper from Sarah, every passive-aggressive comment from Eleanor, it all melted away. He was my husband. We were starting our life together. The man who stood before me, crying with love, couldn't possibly be the same man who thought it was hilarious to replace my shampoo with mayonnaise a month ago. The reception was held in a beautifully restored barn. Laughter echoed off the high wooden beams, and the golden light from the chandeliers made everything sparkle. We danced our first dance to a song he'd chosen, his hand firm on my back, his breath warm on my neck as he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Clara." I believed him. I was floating. Then came the cake cutting. It was the moment everyone was waiting for. The cameras and phones all pointed at us. The cake was my masterpiece, a confection of vanilla bean and raspberry filling, adorned with those delicate sugar flowers I'd spent a fortune on. The photographer positioned us, Mark's hand over mine on the silver knife. "Smile," he called out. We smiled. We cut the first slice together, the knife sinking smoothly through the layers of frosting and sponge. It was perfect. Mark took the small plate and fork. Traditionally, you feed each other a small, polite bite. I leaned in, my mouth slightly open, ready for the sweet taste of our future. Mark's playful grin, the one I'd fallen in love with, flickered for a second, replaced by something else. Something sharper, more manic. Instead of offering the fork, he took a small dab of frosting on his finger and gently smudged it on the tip of my nose. It was cute. The crowd awed. I laughed, reaching up to wipe it off. "Oh, you're in for it now," I teased, picking up a tiny bit of frosting myself to return the favor. That was the game. That was the tradition. But Mark wasn't playing the same game. As I reached for him, his entire demeanor shifted. His best man, Josh, who worshipped the ground Mark walked on, yelled, "Don't let her win, man." It was all the encouragement he needed. Before I could even process what was happening, Mark grabbed the entire hefty slice of cake in his fist. His eyes were wide with a kind of gleeful malice. I took a step back, my smile faltering. "Mark, don't," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My dress. My makeup." He didn't listen. With a loud theatrical roar that got a cheer from his side of the room, he shoved the entire slice of cake into my face. It wasn't a gentle push. He ground it in, smearing sticky raspberry filling into my hair, my eyes, down the intricate beading of my expensive wedding dress. Icy shock washed over me. I could feel the thick, cold goo sliding down my cheek, chunks of cake getting caught in my eyelashes. The crowd's laughter was deafening, a mix of genuine amusement from his friends and nervous titters from mine. I stood there, frozen, utterly humiliated, as a single tear mixed with the sugary mess on my face. Through my blurred vision, I saw Sarah rushing forward, a look of pure fury on her face, but Eleanor, Mark's mother, intercepted her, grabbing her arm. "It's just a bit of fun," Eleanor chirped loudly, her voice grating. "Boys will be boys." Mark was beaming, triumphant, like he'd just won a trophy. He took a bow for his cheering friends. I tried to find my voice to salvage some shred of dignity. Wiping the frosting from my mouth, I forced a tight, brittle smile. "Okay, Mark," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "You win. That was a really great joke. Now if someone could get me a napkin." I wanted to de-escalate. I wanted to pretend this was fine, that I was the cool wife who could take a joke. But the look on my face must have betrayed me. My forced smile wasn't fooling anyone. Mark's triumphant expression soured. He stepped closer, his voice low and menacing, a complete contrast to the party atmosphere. "Don't you dare ruin this," he hissed, so only I could hear. "Smile. You're embarrassing me." Embarrassing him? The sheer audacity of that statement snapped something inside me. All the suppressed frustrations, the dismissed red flags, the times I'd swallowed my discomfort for his amusement, it all came rushing to the surface. My fake smile dropped completely. I looked him dead in the eye. "You're embarrassing me," I said, my voice low and steady. I don't know what he saw in my eyes. Maybe for the first time he saw not the quiet librarian who adored him, but a woman he had pushed too far. His face contorted with a rage I'd only seen glimpses of before. It was instantaneous. His hand came up so fast I didn't even have time to flinch. A sharp, stinging crack echoed through the sudden silence of the barn. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring and the lingering laughter like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. The sting on my cheek blossomed into a hot, throbbing fire. He had slapped me. My husband, on our wedding day, in front of 200 of our friends and family, had just slapped me across the face. The world went silent. The DJ's upbeat music screeched to a halt. Every single eye in that barn was on us. I could hear the photographer's camera clicking on autofocus, a robotic, soulless sound. I slowly turned my head back to face him. The red handprint was already beginning to form on my skin, a stark contrast to the white frosting and ivory dress. Mark's eyes were wide, a flicker of shock in them, as if his own hand had betrayed him. He opened his mouth to say something, probably another excuse, another, "It was just a joke." But he never got the chance. My gaze drifted past his horrified face, past my weeping mother and Sarah's murderous glare, and landed on the DJ's table just a few feet away. On a stand, gleaming under the chandeliers, was the microphone. My feet felt like they were encased in lead, but they moved. One step, then another. It was a slow, deliberate march towards the DJ's table, and with every inch I covered, the silence in the room grew heavier, more suffocating. I didn't look at anyone. Not at my parents, whose faces I knew would be etched with horror and pity. Not at Sarah, who was already pushing her way through the stunned crowd towards me, her bridesmaid's bouquet crushed in her fist. Most of all, I didn't look at Mark. I could feel his presence behind me, a vortex of panic and rage. He took a step, his hand reaching for my arm. "Clara, stop," he whispered, his voice a frantic, desperate rasp. "Clara, don't, we can fix this, just come back here." I didn't even pause. I shook his hand off my arm without a word, a small, dismissive gesture that felt more powerful than any scream. His touch felt alien, like a spider crawling on my skin. The man whose hands I had held at the altar just hours ago was a stranger to me now. Or worse, not a stranger at all, but the real man I had refused to see. The calm clarity that had settled over me was terrifyingly pure. The world had narrowed to a single point of focus. That microphone. It was no longer just a piece of audio equipment. It was a weapon. It was my voice. I reached the table and my fingers closed around the cool, heavy metal of the mic. I flipped the small switch to on. A brief, sharp squeal of feedback cut through the tension, making several people jump. Good. I wanted them awake for this. I wanted them to hear every single word. I turned to face the crowd, my 200 wedding guests, their faces a gallery of shock, confusion, and morbid curiosity. And finally, I let my eyes fall on my husband. The color had drained from his face. The cocky, triumphant groom was gone, replaced by a pale, cornered animal. Beside him, his mother Eleanor was whispering furiously in his ear, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his jacket. She looked like a queen whose castle was about to be stormed. I brought the microphone to my lips. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hand was steady. "Good evening, everyone," I began. My voice came out clear and even, amplified throughout the barn. It didn't even sound like my own. It was stronger, colder. "I'd like to thank you all for coming today to celebrate what was meant to be the happiest day of our lives." A nervous cough rippled through the crowd. I saw my father take a protective step towards my mother, who was openly weeping into a linen napkin. "Most of you know Mark as the life of the party," I continued. My gaze locked on him. "He loves a good prank. He has a boisterous sense of humor." I let the words hang in the air. I saw a few of his friends, the ones who had been cheering him on moments ago, shift uncomfortably on their feet. He finds it incredibly funny to make people uncomfortable, to humiliate them for a laugh, like the time he switched the sugar with salt at his parents' dinner party, causing his diabetic uncle to spit his coffee all over the table. Everyone laughed. Or the time he thought it would be hilarious to replace my shampoo with mayonnaise a week before our engagement photos. I smelled like a deli sandwich for 3 days. A low murmur started to spread through the room. These weren't secrets, but they were things people had chosen to see as harmless quirks. Now, laid bare in the context of the slap, they sounded sinister. I turned my head slightly, making sure the red, angry mark on my cheek was visible to everyone. And his mother, Eleanor, has always been his biggest defender. I looked directly at her. Her face was stone, her eyes burning with a hatred so intense it was almost visible. She's told me on multiple occasions that boys will be boys. She's assured me that his energy is something a wife simply has to get used to. I took a breath, letting the weight of her words sink in. And I tried. I really did. I smiled through the jokes. Oh, I pretended to be a good sport, because I loved him, and I thought that was what love was, making allowances, seeing the best in someone. My voice finally cracked, just for a moment, a sliver of the heartbroken woman I was underneath the ice. Then the coldness returned. "But I have a question for you, Eleanor. For all of you who laughed. Is this a joke?" I pointed to my cheek. "Is a husband hitting his wife in the face on their wedding day just another case of boys will be boys? Is this something I'm supposed to get used to?" A collective gasp went through the room. No one could pretend they hadn't seen it, and now no one could pretend it was anything other than what it was. Mark took a step towards me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Clara, baby, I'm so sorry," he pleaded, his voice loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I don't know what happened. I got carried away. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I said into the mic, my voice dripping with contempt. "You've been making these mistakes our entire relationship, Mark. The only difference is that this time, people were watching." I looked out at the sea of faces. "Well, I hope you all enjoyed the show. But it's over. There will be no marriage. There will be no honeymoon. In fact, as of this moment, this entire wedding is cancelled. I will be seeking an annulment first thing Monday morning." I clicked the microphone off and placed it deliberately back on its stand. The finality of the act was absolute. Sarah was by my side in an instant, her arm wrapping around my shoulders like a shield. My father was right behind her, his face a thundercloud of protective rage. "Let's go, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. We turned to leave, a small defiant procession walking out on a $100,000 disaster. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. No one said a word. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my dress rustling against the floor. We were almost at the large barn doors, almost free. Don't you dare take another step. The voice was not Mark's. It was Eleanor's. It was low, sharp, and cut through the air like a shard of glass. I stopped, my back still to her. I didn't want to turn around. I just wanted to leave. But Sarah squeezed my shoulder, and together we turned. Eleanor hadn't moved from her spot next to the cake table. Her posture was ramrod straight, her face a mask of cold, calculated fury. But she wasn't looking at me. Her venomous gaze was fixed on her own son, who stood frozen in place, looking like a terrified child. "Tell her, Mark," Eleanor commanded, her voice dangerously quiet, but echoing in the tomb-like silence of the room. "Tell your blushing bride why she can't leave you. Tell her what you did." The air in the barn crackled with a new, terrifying energy. Eleanor's words hung there, suspended in the unnatural silence, thick and poisonous. My father took another step forward, placing himself between me and the whole horrifying scene. "This is over, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl. "Clara is coming with us. We're done here." But I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. I couldn't leave. Not now. I had to know. What could possibly be worse than what had already happened? What secret was so dark that this monstrous woman thought it could somehow bind me to her son after he'd just assaulted me? Mark looked like he'd been turned to stone. His face, which had been pale with panic, was now ashen. A sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. He stared at his mother, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He shook his head slowly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Mom, don't," he mouthed, his voice gone. Eleanor ignored him completely. She took a single, predatory step forward, her silk dress shimmering under the chandeliers. Her gaze, cold and hard as diamonds, finally shifted from her son to me. "You think you can just walk away from this?" she spat, her voice no longer quiet. It was laced with venom. "You think you can humiliate my son, destroy this family, and just waltz out the door with your daddy? You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, you naive little girl." "What I've gotten myself into," I shot back, my own voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed, "is a marriage with a man who hits his wife. And what I'm doing is getting myself out. Whatever you have to say, it doesn't matter. It changes nothing." A cruel, thin smile stretched Eleanor's lips. It was a horrifying sight. "Oh, but it does, dear. It changes everything." She clasped her hands in front of her, as if preparing to give a lecture. "You see, Clara, you came from such a modest background. A librarian. So sweet. So simple. Your parents are lovely people, I'm sure. Teachers, aren't they?" She didn't wait for an answer. "They worked their whole lives, saved every penny they had to give you this fairy tale wedding. The dress, the venue, the 6-tier cake." She gestured around the opulent barn with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It must have cost them their entire life savings. Am I wrong?" I felt a cold dread begin to pool in the pit of my stomach. My parents had been so proud. They'd insisted on paying for the wedding, a final grand gift to their only daughter. They'd cashed out investments, pulled from their retirement fund. "It's worth every penny to see you this happy, sweetheart," my dad had told me just this morning, his eyes misty. The memory was like a knife in my gut. "What is your point, Eleanor?" my father demanded, his voice tight with anger. "My point," she said, her smile widening, "is that you didn't pay for any of this." The statement was so absurd that I almost laughed. "What are you talking about? Of course we did. I saw the checks. I saw the bank statements." "Did you?" Eleanor purred, walking slowly towards the ruined cake table. She ran a finger through a smear of frosting, then wiped it distastefully on a napkin. "You saw the statements, but did you see where the money went? Did you track the payments? Or did you just hand over the checks to my darling Mark to handle everything?" My blood ran cold. The dread in my stomach turned to ice. It was true. Mark had insisted on handling all the vendors. He'd said it was the groom's job to take care of the stressful logistics, to let me focus on being the beautiful bride. He'd shown me spreadsheets, payment schedules. I'd trusted him. I had given him my parents' signed blank checks, made out to the caterer, the florist, the venue. My son is a very successful architect, Eleanor continued, her voice echoing in the silent room. But he's had some cash flow problems lately. A business deal that went sour. Nasty business. He was in a bit of a hole. A very deep hole. She paused, letting the implication sink in. Mark was still frozen, his face a mask of abject horror. He wouldn't even look at me. But then you came along, Eleanor said, her eyes glinting, and your sweet, trusting parents, so eager to give their little girl the perfect day. That money, that very generous nest egg they gave you for the wedding, it never went to the vendors, Clara. Not a single dime of it. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. I grabbed Sarah's arm to steady myself. Beside me, my father made a choked, strangled sound. The money went to pay off my son's gambling debts, Eleanor announced, her voice ringing with a perverse sort of pride. Every last penny of your parents' life savings. He owed some very, very unpleasant people a great deal of money. Your wedding gift paid them off. The collective shock in the room was a physical force. People were whispering, staring. My mother let out a grief-stricken sob. My father looked like he was going to have a heart attack. He took a staggering step toward Mark, his fists clenched. You son of a bitch, he rasped. So you see, Eleanor said, completely unfazed by the devastation she was causing. This wedding isn't paid for. The venue, the caterers, the band, the florist, they're all expecting to be paid tonight. From my family's account. An account which will remain untouched unless this wedding proceeds as planned. She finally looked at me, her eyes devoid of any human warmth. You can't just walk away, Clara, because if you do, if you annul this marriage, I will not pay a single vendor, and they will come after the people who signed the contracts. They will come after your parents. They will take their house, their car, everything they have left. They will be ruined. My son made a mistake, a stupid, childish mistake. But you will stand by him. You will smile for the cameras. You will cut the rest of this goddamn cake, and you will be his wife. Or you will be the daughter who destroyed her own parents. I stared at her, then at Mark, who was now openly weeping, his face buried in his hands. He was pathetic, weak, a thief and a coward hiding behind his monster of a mother. She had me trapped. She had laid the perfect snare, and I had walked right into it, blinded by love and sugar flowers. Ruin my parents or chain myself to this man for the rest of my life. It was an impossible choice. The weight of it was crushing me, suffocating me. For a moment I felt nothing but despair. She had won. My gaze drifted around the room, past the horrified faces of my friends, the stunned expressions of distant relatives, and landed on someone I hadn't noticed before. Standing near the back, by the bar, was Mark's best man, Josh. But he wasn't looking at Mark or Eleanor. He was staring at me, his face pale and sickened. And in his hand I saw his phone. He hadn't been holding it a few minutes ago. He was holding it up now, angled slightly, and there was a small red light blinking in the top corner. He'd been recording. He had been recording everything. Our eyes met across the room. Josh's expression was a chaotic mix of guilt, fear, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. A plea, maybe. He had been Mark's biggest cheerleader, the one who egged him on, the one who yelled, "Don't let her win, man." But hearing Eleanor's cold, calculated confession, seeing the raw, sociopathic cruelty of it all, had clearly pushed him past some invisible line. The blinking red light on his phone was a beacon in the suffocating darkness of Eleanor's ultimatum. It was an unexpected, desperate lifeline. A switch flipped inside me. The despair that had threatened to drown me was instantly replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, clear fury that sharpened my thoughts and steadied my voice. They thought they had me trapped. They thought they could use my love for my parents to chain me to a life of misery. They had underestimated me. "Let me see if I have this straight, Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. I didn't need the microphone anymore. My anger was amplification enough. I took a step away from my father and Sarah, positioning myself in the center of the room, turning the wedding aisle into my own personal stage. "You are telling me, in front of 200 witnesses, that your son, my husband," I spat the word like poison, "is a thief. that he stole my parents' life savings, over $100,000, to pay off his gambling debts. Eleanor's smug expression faltered. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She had anticipated tears, pleading, a quiet, broken submission. "I am telling you the reality of your situation," she said, her voice tight. "And you," I continued, my gaze shifting to Mark, who flinched as if I'd struck him again. "You stood at that altar today, and you cried. You talked about my kindness and my gentle spirit. You promised to love and protect me. Was that all a lie, Mark? Were you thinking about my parents' retirement fund when you were reciting your vows?" He couldn't answer. He just stood there, a pathetic, weeping mess, the architect of his own destruction. "And your solution, Eleanor," I went on, turning back to the true villain of this story, "is blackmail. You want me to stay married to your criminal son, to pretend this is a happy, loving union, or you'll financially destroy my family. You'll let them take the fall for your son's crimes." "It's a family matter," she snapped, her composure finally starting to crack. "It should be handled privately." "Oh, I agree," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "It absolutely is a family matter. And it's also a criminal one." I looked over at Josh. His eyes were wide, but he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He knew what I was doing. He was with me. Fraud, theft by deception, and now extortion. I let each word land like a hammer blow. These are very serious crimes. Crimes that carry very serious prison sentences. The color drained from Eleanor's face. The word prison was something that had likely never been uttered in her pristine, manicured world. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "You would be dragging your own name through the mud. Think of the scandal." "My name?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "My name is already covered in cake and humiliation. What do I have left to lose? You, on the other hand." I let my gaze sweep over her expensive designer dress, her perfectly coiffed hair, her diamond jewelry. "You have everything to lose. Your reputation, your social standing, your freedom." I held out my hand towards the back of the room. "Josh," I called out, my voice clear and commanding. "I believe you have something for me." Every head in the room swiveled towards him. Josh looked terrified, but he didn't hesitate. He pushed off the bar and walked towards me, his phone held out in front of him like an offering. He pointedly avoided looking at Mark or Eleanor as he walked past them. He stopped in front of me and placed the phone in my hand. "He told me he just owed a little on some bad sports bets," Josh said, his voice shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. I had no idea it was this. I'm so sorry, Clara." I gave him a small, grateful nod before turning my attention back to the phone. The screen was still on, the video recording. I hit the stop button and saved the file. Then I looked up at the two monsters who had tried to ruin my life. "Here's what's going to happen now," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "You are going to get out your checkbook, Eleanor. You are going to write a check to each and every vendor for the full amount owed for this event." I gestured around the barn. "And then you are going to write a second check. This one will be to my parents for the full amount that your son stole from them, plus an additional $50,000 for pain and suffering." "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "This is extortion." "No, Eleanor," I said calmly. "This is a choice. Option A is you pay for the damage your son has caused. You give my parents their life back. In return, this video," I held up the phone, "gets deleted and we all walk away from this nightmare tonight. I'll sign whatever divorce papers you want. We will never see or speak to each other again. Option B, I text this video to every single person in this room. Then I call the police, and I can assure you the district attorney will be very interested in a confession to grand larceny and blackmail, on video, with 200 witnesses." Silence. Utter, complete silence. Eleanor's face was a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. She was a cornered animal, and she knew it. She looked at her son, hoping for what? Support? A defense? But Mark was a broken man, incapable of even looking her in the eye. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces of her friends and business associates, and saw only judgment and disgust. She had no allies left. With a movement so sharp it was violent, she snatched her purse from the cake table, pulled out a checkbook and a pen. Her hands were shaking with rage as she began to write. As she scribbled, I walked over to the DJ's booth and picked up the microphone one last time. I clicked it on. To our guests, I announced, my voice echoing through the barn. I apologize for the abrupt end to the festivities. The wedding is, as I said, cancelled. However, since everything has now been paid for, please feel free to stay. Enjoy the food, the open bar, the music. Consider it a celebration of my freedom. I put the mic down and walked back to Eleanor, who had just finished tearing the last check from the book. She practically threw them at me. I handed the large check to my father, whose face was a mixture of relief and stunned disbelief. "Thank you, Daddy, for everything," I whispered, hugging him tightly. He held me, his body trembling slightly. "I'm so proud of you, Clara," he choked out. "So damn proud." I turned, checks in hand, ready to leave. I walked past Mark one last time. He finally looked up at me, his face swollen and red from crying. "Clara, he started. "Don't," I said, cutting him off. I didn't have any anger left for him. All I felt was a vast, empty pity. "I hope it was worth it, Mark." And with that, I turned my back on him for the last time. Sarah looped her arm through mine, and together with my parents, we walked towards the big barn doors. As we stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind, I heard the DJ, after a moment of hesitation, put on a new song. It was Gloria Gaynor. "I Will Survive." A smile finally touched my lips. It was real, and it was all mine.